I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone that's grown quite as aggressively as you have, such a short amount of time and so huge. Mate, like we just got a couple of stats here. 62 rental properties, producing about $2 million a year in gross rental income. It's about $42,000 a week, roughly, give or take a few dollars. That's a hell of a start to your story. Man, I wanted to rewind back a little bit.
Sure.
Can you talk to me a little bit about growing up? What's the experiences that come to mind when I ask you what helped you back then make the man that you are today?
How far should we go? Should we go back to...
As far as you want.
Okay.
We got time.
Okay, cool. So I came to Australia when I was 7.
Okay.
I was born in China, Shanghai.
Okay.
And coming from an Asian family, academia, that type of thing was always high on the family priority list. So I can remember coming to Australia fairly soon after that, going into after school to learn English. And then shortly after that, when I was getting closer to, say, year 6, going into tuition to get into selective schools and so on and so forth. So if you ask me in a nutshell, in terms of growing up, grades, being good at school was always front of mind.
Okay.
Now, fast forward, and high school did quite well. And then when I went into university, that was when things kind of fell off the rail.
How so?
Mainly more so that for the entire childhood and also going to high school, there was always someone kind of watching over you to see whether you were studying, whether you were doing your homework. So the high school that I went to is James Roos, and that's one of the top selective schools in New South Wales.
Okay, so mum and dad like paid big money for your education.
Oh, that was kind of doing a test to get in there.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
So, but the teachers were very strict.
Yep.
Kind of to the point where at the end of the year, after you do your maths exam, they'll post up the rankings of all 120 students up on the wall.
Right. So they wanted to breed competitiveness.
100%.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was just, very kind of cutthroat in terms of marks, academia, that type of climate in terms of that particular school.
Yep.
So when I went to university, there was no pressure. My parents, in a sense, felt like they've done their job.
Mm-hmm.
Lecturers, tutors didn't really care whether you went to uni or not. And for the first 2 years, I didn't turn up to one lecture. I think I did
2 years?
Yeah. And the funny thing is I did a commerce degree, which is a 3-year course.
Yeah.
It took me 8 years to finish because I just basically didn't go to class.
The accomplished investor that I just introduced, this doesn't sound like the start I was expecting.
No. And so it kind of folds on from there. So I didn't finish uni until I was 25, 26.
What were mum and dad thinking at this stage?
So during that time,
yeah,
they were, so in one sense, they felt that they'd done their role. So they've gotten me into university. I was kind of out on my own in that sense.
You're up to you then.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. On the flip side, I wasn't going to class, but I was holding down a full-time job. And I started working full-time when I was 19. Okay. And I just got addicted to working in a sense.
Okay, so the work ethic was there, just not for study.
Correct, yeah.
Right.
So
just out of interest, is it because you didn't like what you were studying at all?
Well, I'm like working a little bit more than studying because in my mind, I'm like, you're learning, but they're also teaching you, but you're getting paid at the same time for learning. Whereas I would go to school and the topic didn't quite interest me.
What was it?
It was commerce.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. But I also didn't really kind of see a return on that. And going to work, even though it was like $14 an hour, $15 an hour, and I was working in a market research company, answering inboxes, being on call, even just getting paid, fairly okay in my mind at that time. You'll do an 8-hour shift and you'll clear $100, $150. To me, that was already the world.
Yeah, okay. So you're already looking at this going, I can put in effort over here, maybe see a return one day, and I'm having to pay to go to uni, essentially. You're getting a HECS debt that's adding up, I'm assuming, yeah. Or I can start earning money, and this is actually pretty fascinating what I'm doing as well.
Correct, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So kind of dove into full-time work, and that took priority.
Yep.
And that carried on for the next 8 years before I finished uni. But the thing that kind of struck me towards the end of that was a lot of my friends that did focus on study, that did get good jobs, they were starting to get ahead in terms of their career.
Okay.
Whereas from my side, I hadn't gotten a degree. I was still working essentially in a call center to a certain point. Mm-hmm. If I continued down that trajectory, I wasn't going to get to where I wanted to in life. And this realization came to me around when I was 28.
Out of interest, you said I wasn't going to get to where I wanted to in life.
Yep.
Where was that back then?
It wasn't really fleshed out when I was 27, 28. And even back then, I didn't really have the concept of goals, self-development, or anything like that. But I just knew that at the time I was on a salary of about 80,000.
Okay.
That if I continue that, then in terms of supporting a family, having a decent enough lifestyle, that wasn't going to get me to where I wanted to go.
So you had this realization around 28 years old.
Yep.
And is that what then, like you found a property book? What was like the next kind of catalyst?
Sure. It was actually watching on YouTube. I know you would know Nathan Birch.
Of course.
Yeah. So he had a YouTube channel.
Yep.
Where he would go to Mount Druitt, Western Sydney.
And Kempsey and buy $8,000 houses.
Exactly,
I remember. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I used to watch his renovation videos, buy a house for $150,000, $160,000.
Yep.
Spend $10,000, $15,000, renovate it, and then at the end of it, create a whole bunch of equity.
The dude killed it back in the day.
Oh, it was insane. And just what he represented, because he's a year younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
So I found his videos when I was 28 and he was 27. I think at the time he was sitting on 75 properties.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Okay.
And I'm like, that's insane.
How's
and he didn't
done
even
this?
finish uni. Like he didn't go to uni.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So he became a bit of what, a mentor or just an inspiration from afar?
Yeah. So it was an inspiration from afar at that point. And I remember when I came across his videos, there was one day that I told my parents, I'm like, you guys have to sit down and watch this. And the very next day we were out Mount Druitt looking at these properties that were housing commission that needed a full renovation.
Yep.
So if you ask me in terms of really getting into property investing and seeing it from a slightly different light, it was actually watching and learning about Nathan's story.
So as far as the experiences that shaped you growing up, it sounds like having that direction at a private school that was super strict, super competitive, get taken away from you, and then you're in a uni where it's like you can just do what you want.
Yep.
It sounds like that was a big part of shaping you to then push yourself towards working more. You enjoyed earning more money. But then when friends started getting ahead a little bit more, that didn't sit right with you. And you're like, wait a second, I can do more than this. What am I doing? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it was more so just kind of seeing that in terms of where I was heading in life.
So it wasn't a comparison to your mates the same way?
I mean, it was to a certain sense, but even just in terms of what I wanted from life at 28 and also just holding down the job that I did.
Yep.
And at the time, like I didn't really know what I wanted. So I actually went and did further studies. So I went back and did my MBA.
Okay.
I looked at other things that I could do, but it was always searching for things that could kind of lead me to a better financial future. And I think a lot of clients that I work with is in a similar situation where, you know, they're either looking at businesses, properties, investing, whatever it is, but something to spend their time and attention on to then improve their financial future.
Talk to me about the first rental then.
Yep.
How did that come about? Like you're in Mount Druitt?
No. So that phase was around when I was 28. So my first property was a little bit before then. So this was in my early 20s, knew nothing about property investing.
Mm-hmm.
Spoken to a mate and he was like, hey, look, there's a really good development happening in Epping.
Yep.
And it's got a pool, sauna right next to the train station. So I remember then going to the showroom and I basically asked the salesperson, what's the cheapest unit in this complex that I could get into?
Okay.
And he goes, the bottom floor studio.
How much was it?
340,000. And this was 20 years ago.
Jeez. Okay.
To put it into perspective, a Blacktown house in Western Sydney back then would have been cheaper than 340.
It hurts when you look back, doesn't it?
Yeah, incredible.
I've got a similar story with that. It wasn't off the plan, but it was a 2-bedroom apartment,
Yep.
North Terrace, Adelaide. It was 3 years old. It may as well have been off the plan.
Yep.
And I bought it for 280, ended up selling it 10 years later for 350. So technically made money. I
Yep.
reckon the thing's still worth 350 now. Like it's
I mean, when you don't research and you're just kind of put into that position, I can see how it's attractive.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Well, it's because it's cool. Like you got your spa and
sauna in the gym. You
How
know,
can this not go up in value?
yeah. And then also the best part was I didn't even really need to put anything down until it completed, which was 2-3 years away. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'll just sign it. And then I'll shelve the idea of looking to get finance for it for the next couple of years until then it settles.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was the first property, absolute disaster. And, rightfully so, because I did zero research into it. I basically took a friend's advice and ended up purchasing the property.
I just want to make a point here of saying to anyone listening that feels like they've made a mistake, because I get this as messages all the time. And it's like, I'm 30 something years old. It's too late. I bought this. I shouldn't have bought that. Here's a man that's sitting in front of me right now with 62 rental properties that made probably the biggest mistake that we can I want to almost call it the cardinal sin of property investing. Like, you can obviously come back, but you've got to realize that it's not the right way. When did you wake up to it and go, wait a second, this isn't what I should be doing?
I would say not until when I was 28, kind of coming across Nathan's story.
Okay.
Because then you kind of see the properties that he's purchasing, the value add that he's bringing to the table, and the numbers. Because up until then, so I would have bought it in my early 20s to then, so, looking at almost 8 years, I really didn't even think of property investing as something to really focus on. It was just something that, one, my parents were like, hey, look, you're earning money through work. You might as well put it to something of good use.
Okay.
And I think there's, in terms of the Chinese community, a lot of investors from that background gravitate towards off the plan, because that's something that they know or familiar with. So
is that just because, like, in China it's so much more common? Is there a reason behind that? Or
I think also that if you're a foreign buyer, you can't buy existing.
Right. Okay. That makes sense.
That's kind of the product that, and in a sense, it is attractive in a sense where, in some instances you don't put in any money, 2-3 years later, it's gone up 100,000. That's kind of the story that you get sold.
If the market's in your
Correct,
favor. Yeah.
exactly.
Gotcha.
Which, it's just a gamble. So in that sense, if you ask me when did the penny drop, it would have been later when I actually researched property investing, and I look back on that purchase and I'm like, oh, I actually made a very big mistake. Throughout these years owning that property, like, I did think that, like, the numbers weren't great, because one of the things also with off the plan is for the first year or so, the strata is quite low, but then after that,
starts to kill you. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Was it at least a high yield?
Not really. Like, I mean, it was okay. I think I bought it for 340 and was first leased at 380, 390.
It's not that good, is it?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things. But the real issue, it was like a shoebox. It was 39 square meters.
Your lending would have been tricky.
It was, but back then, so I used Homeside for that lending.
Okay.
So, I mean, I wasn't a broker back then, don't know the policies, but I think that it was a lot easier to get lending for back then.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So you're 28 years old. You've discovered Birchie on YouTube. You're starting to look back and go, wait a second, this probably isn't for me now, or it's not the right choice.
Yep.
What's the next, or I want to say, like, the first informed purchase?
Okay. So I used Nathan Birch for my third purchase. So in between, there was another property. Okay. And I actually just purchased down the road in Macquarie Park.
Okay.
And luckily for this one, it was an older 2-bedroom unit. And it was in a very, very good location. It was like 5 minutes walk from Macquarie University. It was a 3-story walk up. Okay. And in terms of performance, that's been one of the better performers in the entire property portfolio.
Talk me through that, because a lot of people are bad-mouthing units of, like, it's not a good investment. And you've just said it's one of your best.
So the story behind this is, again, it was actually through a friend. So I would go and pick up this friend and we'll go and play footy. And every time I went to pick him up, he was like, oh, meet me at unit 62. Next time it was unit 26. And then the final time's unit 14. Okay. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Like, why are you shifting around all of these? And he goes, oh, my parents own a bunch of units in this complex. Okay. And basically he would then go to each, if there was like a room vacant or something like that, he will then kind of live in that room, or he'll go around and then do a little bit of property management, collecting rent and so on and so forth. So he was shifting around these different units.
And so he just lived for free for it.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, correct. But then that made me ask him in terms of, oh, okay, how do the numbers work? Are you renting them out to students and so on and so forth? And when I dug a little bit better, I'm like, this is way better than the studio that I bought off the plan.
What were the numbers?
So he was renting them out. And back then, I would say you could buy a unit around there for about 400,000. Okay. And rental return, you could probably get about 500.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Which in a very good location, 5 minutes down the road is Macquarie University, Macquarie Shopping Centre. The numbers was quite good. The other good thing in terms of that particular purchase over time as it kind of unfolded is because the zoning density for Macquarie Park increased, a lot of the units around our particular unit have been sold off to developers.
Right. Okay.
And the developers are paying around 2x in terms of what the market value is.
Yeah. Right. And so how, you said it was a 3-floor walk up?
A 3-floor walk up.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
So you got a good land ratio to your unit?
Exactly. Yep.
Yep.
So in terms of the total owners, there's about 80 owners in the complex. And just recently, in the last 1 to 2 months, we've actually banded all together, used a real estate agent, and we're putting it on the market to then sell to developers.
Right. And what do you reckon your 400 grand is going to turn into?
About 1.5, 1.6.
I can see why you're so happy with it.
Yeah.
Okay. And what year was this that you bought it?
This was in 2010.
2010. Okay. So we're still talking a little while ago. Was that 14 years?
Yep.
Okay.
So that was my second purchase. And at that time, I didn't really know property investing, but it was off the curiosity and also speaking to my friend that I ended up buying a property there.
Okay.
And then fast forward to property 3, that's when I used Nathan Birch.
Okay.
And I actually ended up buying a property in a fairly regional area. Have you heard of Nambucca Heads?
Say it again.
Nambucca Heads.
No.
Oh, okay.
I shouldn't laugh. I've literally never even heard that word.
Okay. How about Coffs Harbour?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So Nambucca Heads is near?
Very, very close to Coffs Harbour.
Right. It sounds like you're swearing. So you bought a property in Nambucca Heads.
Yep. And this was in 2013.
Okay.
And I paid $155,000 for a house there.
I know what Coffs has done over the years.
Yep.
And I'm assuming you're about to say Nambucca Heads has done something very similar.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So since COVID, it's gone gangbusters. It's done very, very well. Up until COVID, it was fairly stagnant, but with the rise of, remote style accommodation, all of those areas has just gone up. So after holding it now for 11 years, it's performed very, very well.
When did you start realizing like this could be something big? Because right now you're telling some stories that are like, okay, this is a really good deal. That one's done really well over the years. But like you haven't just accumulated all of these properties in the past 2 years. This has been like really slow and steady. When did that sort of
aha moment drop?
Yeah.
Back then it was in theory it worked because I would be watching these videos of Nathan Birch doing these renovations out at Mount Druitt Blacktown. Also during that time, I got addicted to property investing and just living and breathing property investing as much as I could. So there was a forum back then called Summersoft.
I remember Summersoft.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I will contribute a fair bit to that. And any meetup that Summersoft had, whether it was in Western Sydney, whether it was in the city or at Parramatta, I would make a beeline and just sit next to investors that had come before me and then just pick their brains. And for me, in terms of the penny dropping, it wasn't really until the 4th and 5th property that I said, hey, actually, maybe this can work. And I'll kind of tell you the reasons behind that.
Yep.
So the 3rd property I bought through Nathan Birch. And then after that, for the 4th property, I decided, hey, why don't I have a crack at this myself? And I still clearly remember in 2013, at the time, going to auctions in Western Sydney, went to an auction in Mount Druitt, and a house on 600 square meters, 3-bedroom house, sold for $235,000.
So did you say 2016?
No, in 2013.
2013.
Yeah.
So that makes more sense.
Yeah. And I remember back then, I didn't win the auction. I'm like, oh man, Sydney's gone up too much. How's this house worth $230 something? Because 2 months earlier, a similar house sold for $210,000. But at the time, I'm like, the market's cooked. I'm not going to be buying Sydney. Yep. And I remember speaking to people on Property Chat, Summersoft back then, also reading and doing a lot of research. One of the themes that came across was if Sydney was going up, then the satellite cities like your Newcastle's, Wollongong will go up a little bit later than that.
Okay.
So for a period of time, every weekend, I would drive from Sydney to Newcastle and also to Wollongong and just go through and inspect open homes.
Right. Okay.
And back then, no one was really looking in Newcastle and Wollongong. So I ended up buying a 2-bedroom house on 700 square meters in a suburb called Gateshead for $195,000.
And that's in Newcastle or Wollongong?
In Newcastle.
In Newcastle.
Yeah. And I bought a 3-bedroom house in Cardiff for $225,000.
So you're getting like what, pretty low value, high yield properties.
Correct.
But you're not going and following the pack. You're looking around going, okay, where's everyone not buying at the moment?
Correct. And I mean, in hindsight, I would have done better if I stuck to Sydney. But then kind of looking outside of that, I'm like, it's a lot quieter in Newcastle. Let me go and try the market there. And when the penny dropped was I bought the house for 195 in Gateshead, and it needed a renovation. Like, it wasn't a nice house by any stretch of the means. And I spent about 35,000 on a renovation. So all in all, it was about 220, 230. And within 3 months afterwards, I got a bank valuation back at 295.
In 3 months?
Yeah.
You're going to be happy with that.
I know. And that's when the penny dropped, because I was like, I spent 3 months and it increased in value by 60,000 after the money that I put in. I couldn't save 60,000 on my salary from work, you know.
And what were you earning back then, roughly?
About 80,000.
So you're still on pretty modest income. Like 80 grand back then is not bad, but it's not. That's not.
But
huge,
it wasn't.
though.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
But to have made 60,000 in 3 months.
Yeah.
And
what's that? 2/3 of a year's wage.
Correct. And, you know, this is after taxes. And then you have to save on top of that. It probably would have taken me a good 1 to 2 years to save 60,000 if I was, you know, saving extremely hard. And I did this all in the span of 3 months. I'm like, man, if I put more time and effort into this, then maybe it can lead somewhere. And the other powerful thing is you kind of, you know, hear about people talking about property, renovating, equity. But it's not until you see it for yourself when the equity lands in your account, then that you truly believe it. You're like, oh man, this actually works.
Yep.
This is how it all kind of fits in together. So I basically ended up doing a renovation in the property that Nathan had purchased me, a renovation in Gateshead, and also a renovation in Cardiff.
And when you say you did the reno, are you going DIY styles, picking up the hammers? Or are you coordinating everything with trades? How are you doing it?
Like, I'm coordinating. I'm the worst with my hands. Like, I'm just like a keyboard warrior. I just sit on the computer. Like, in terms of to change a light bulb, I would struggle with that.
Okay.
Yeah. So I ended up and got lucky, actually. I found a really good builder, and I have to thank a lot of those early renovations to the builder. And it was actually a funny story behind it. So the builder did the renovations for me in Nambucca Heads. I had interviewed a bunch of builders, got them to meet me out at the property in Nambucca, go through, ask them for their suggestions. And the builder that I ended up selecting, he was 70 years old at the time.
Okay.
And I asked him, why are you still renovating? Like, why aren't you retired? And his answer to me was, my mates that have retired, they've all dropped dead.
You hear that a bit, actually. Okay.
So at the time, I picked up that money wasn't his main motivation.
Okay.
So he wasn't doing it to kind of take me to the cleaners. He was doing it out of, you know, keeping fit, being active, finding a purpose in life.
Just enjoyed it, yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
And, you know, he actually, we built up a really good relationship through Nambucca Heads. It was like, look, you've got these other two. I'll drive to Newcastle. I'll bring my team and I'll help you out on that.
Brilliant.
And it was like, it went so far that early on I was struggling for cash, like to fund all of these renovations. And also to, you know, it wasn't until I could pull out the equity that for a lot of the instances I could then pay him back. He was like, don't pay me for a year.
That's a really good relationship.
I know. It was like, and sometimes it's like, you know, sometimes things are meant to be, or, you know, kind of what's that saying? When the student is ready, the teacher appears, in that sense. So a lot of it was because of him. He helped me through that. And then a year later, after the renovation had finished, we pulled out the equity. Then I ended up paying him back for the work that he did.
That sounds like a very lovely man.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's a lot of success in those early days. Sounds like probably are attributed to you even just crossing paths and building that relationship.
Correct. And I think with a lot of investment journeys or just any journey in life, you come across some people in your life and it's just, you know, they're not purely just after the money. Maybe they gain some other satisfaction in terms of helping or adding value. And there was definitely a number of people that I met throughout my journey that helped me through that.
You're networking to find these people though, aren't you? You just described some pretty, like, some hustle to actually meet as many people as you can.
Yeah. So like, say for instance, in terms of doing the renovation in Nambucca, I've got no experience in terms of renovating. The experience that I had at that point in time was watching the videos on YouTube. That was the extent of it. So what I ended up doing is I would go out to Nambucca. I would organize, you know, 3 different builders to meet me out on that day. And the first builder that went through the property, I was like, look, this is what my aim is. I want to put as little capital into this project as I can. Once it finishes, I wanted to then lease it out. And I'm looking to get a good rental uplift and then to take out the equity and then move on to the next project. What would you recommend that I do?
So you're explaining investment strategy to the builder and then getting recommendations.
Very early on, because I didn't know kind of what I needed to do on the property. So, I mean, the builder probably didn't understand a lot of that, but they kind of took it that I had a limited budget in terms of what to spend.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So then he'll be like, look, I probably wouldn't paint the side of the house. I'll do this, do that. So then on the second builder that then went through the property, I'll have a little bit more of an idea because I've had that conversation with the first. And the third builder, I'll have even a little bit more idea. I'm like, oh, actually, why don't we do this, do that there? And then after that, after speaking to enough builders, then you kind of form like, oh, okay, this is actually a good strategy to do on the property.
Okay. And you got a wife and kids at this stage?
Wife and kids, yes.
Wife
yeah.
and kids.
But during when I was building the property portfolio, no.
No. Oh, so when I say at this stage, I don't mean now.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
like back
When
then.
I was, no, single.
Okay,
Yeah.
So you're single.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So that's how I was like, driving up to Nambucca. It's a 5-hour drive from Sydney. I'll line up the trades and then at night I'll drive home. And it was like, there was sometimes driving there and back. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this is not normal in a sense.
How many hours a week you putting in back then?
Back then, a lot of it was on the weekend.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would book out for Saturday and then Sunday. Yeah. And then during the week, I mean, after work, the main thing that kind of really helped was I would just be saving and scrounging every cent. I'll have friends say, hey, you want to come out on Friday night? Let's go out to town, have a beer. And I'll be like, oh, no, I want to go to the gym. It wasn't because I wanted to go to the gym. I just wanted to save money so I could then put that money into the renovation.
Do you feel that you've sacrificed a lot, or do you look at it and go, no, I haven't sacrificed anything because I'm so happy with what I've built?
I definitely sacrifice. Like, don't get me wrong. That's what I say to people going into property investing. It's not going to be beers and Skittles. It's not going to be all clear sailing. It's not going to be easy.
Is that
sorry?
Beers and Skittles? Is that like a thing that you do? Or like...
No, it's just a saying.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you like to set people's expectation.
100%.
You're going to sacrifice.
Yeah, 100%. You're going to, and there's no wrong or right in that. And early on, after I bought the second property in Macquarie Park, if you asked me to go through and sacrifice that much, I would have been like, no, go away. It's like, why would I do that? But when you truly believe something and then you can see that leading to a better future, then your appetite for putting in more sacrifice and increases.
Yep.
And in my mind, I'm like, if I can really just stick at this and do this for a couple of years, then in terms of what I can end up, it's going to be so much greater than if I didn't go down this path.
So when did you end up cracking double digits?
Double digits. So I got really serious about property investing. So that third property in Nambucca Heads was in 2013 and I quit corporate in 2015 and I went from 2 to 14 properties in 2 years.
Can you open that up a little bit? That sounds like there's something interesting in there.
Yeah. So essentially what happened was for the third, fourth and fifth property, I did renovations and then we managed to get a good uplift on all 3 properties.
Okay.
And I also got a little bit lucky with the market. So around 2015 was the market started to move.
Why do you say luck? You didn't plan on this is going to go for capital growth? Was it just kind of genuinely was luck, or are you being a bit more modest and you really did go, nah, here's the indicators that are going to uplift it?
I would say this is my view on capital growth, that everyone buys the property with the intention or hope that it will go up.
Yeah.
But in terms of exactly when it goes up, I don't think anyone knows.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I do know people spend a lot of time in data researching, but, just in recent events after going through COVID, you can't tell me that a month out from COVID, you could have predicted what happened in the next year.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think, and with all the wars going on, what's happening, I think there's so many factors that we don't control. And I'll give you a good example of this. So in 2015 was when I started buying Brisbane, and I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but just kind of touching on that point. I was buying in Brisbane in 2015, and I was buying in an area called Logan. And a little bit more blue collar, the equivalent of Western Sydney, Blacktown, Mount Druitt, but in Brisbane. And I remember reading the forums, and then a lot of people on the forums were saying, 2015 is going to be the year of Brisbane. Then it turned into 2016, 2017, 2018, 19. It wasn't until around 2020/2021 that it boomed. So you can't tell me sitting in 2015 that you could have predicted exactly which year that would have then dropped.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but every year that I was putting more eggs into that basket, I just felt that area was so undervalued. I'm like, I can't wrap my head around why the value hadn't gone up. And of course there were doubts, there were points in time And towards the end of that, my wife, my girlfriend at the time was like, don't you have enough in, Logan? Like, why do you keep buying more? It hasn't gone up. But in my mind, I was just so sure of it doing something. But when it would do that thing, I've got absolutely no idea.
What gave you that confidence?
In a nutshell, I just couldn't find anywhere else in Australia where you could buy sub 300,000. And the tip of Woodridge, so Logan, to Brisbane's about a 15 kilometre, 20-minute drive with 6 to 7% rental return. I just couldn't find anywhere else in Australia that had those numbers.
So you're looking at it just going, this is just a matter of time.
Correct. Yeah. Exactly when that will turn around, didn't know. But then I would look at other areas in Australia and I couldn't quite find that value. But that's not to say that each year that passed didn't plant more doubt in my mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you had the confidence there, but there was still that other part of your brain going, oh, am I right?
Yeah, 100%. But, kind of to that, it's you looked at other similar areas in Australia. So, I took kind of a leap of faith in terms of Western Sydney because Western Sydney went through a similar thing. And I remember speaking to my parents that were like, oh, we should have bought in Western Sydney. Funnily enough, they actually ran a business. They had a supermarket business in Rooty Hill, which is in that Blacktown area. And they could see the whole area increasing in value. And they had many, many opportunities to buy houses there around 200,000 and they never did. So I kind of took a leap of faith from that maybe that could then replicate itself in Brisbane.
For people watching this now saying, okay, well, it's easy for you, Michael, because you got all these $200,000 houses. I can't get that now. What do you say when you talk to people that have that mindset of like, I've missed the boat. It's too late for me? Because I'd imagine back then when you're buying all of these, people are thinking you're crazy. What's the opportunity now that people with that mindset might be missing?
So when I was going through that process, and this was before I started the mortgage broking business, I actually felt very rushed in the sense I'm like, I need to buy in the market yesterday because if I don't, then the market will get away from us. Now doing broking now for 9 years, what it's taught me is at any point in time, there's an area to invest in. Maybe, and when I started, I thought I was too late because I had missed the Sydney market, in my mind, but it wasn't actually the case, but I thought I had. So then I looked into Newcastle and I wanted to put more money into Newcastle after the renovations had finished, but the market had moved. So then it was Brisbane. And now more recently, a lot of people are putting their money in Perth. And then after Perth will be then another market and then so on and so forth. So I feel at any point in time, there will be an area to invest in. It's then just kind of thinking outside of the box. Maybe it's an area that you might have not thought or maybe comfortable with in the beginning, but then kind of getting a little bit more accustomed with that, doing a little bit more research. I can tell you when I first started looking in Brisbane, even just the thought of buying interstate was so foreign. And it was actually my broker pushing me kind of, hey, why don't you, my broker at the time, why don't you look in another area? You're driving 5 hours to Nambucca Heads. Why don't you jump on a 1 hour flight to Brisbane and just take a look around?
That's some solid logic.
And I'm like, oh, actually, yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. So I think that, and, funnily enough, and we can get into a little bit further, but in the current period in the last 12 months, in terms of my entire investment career, has actually been the most aggressive in terms of me acquiring properties. Okay. If you look at the number of properties and kind of the growth of the portfolio, the biggest growth has happened in the last 12 months. And I guess kind of to put it very high level, interest rates is the highest it's been for a while.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the first time you and I spoke, you were at 40-something rentals, and that
correct.
Wasn't that long ago.
No, correct. So in the space of, a year or so, it's increased by 20. And so kind of following on from that, interest rates is very, very high. And because of that, naturally, there'll be less people in the market. Okay. If there's less people in the market, then potentially there could be more opportunities. So that's why I'm taking this climate to then try to acquire as many properties as I can. So in the current climate, you might, have some viewers or some investors to say, it's harder to get into now. But on the flip side, I also think because it is harder to get into, if you can, there are also a lot of opportunities out there.
Okay. And so what I'm also hearing is you may have missed the boat on a certain area. Doesn't mean you've missed the boat on all areas.
Correct. Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
And like kind of going back to the original question in terms of whether it was luck or not, So that's a very kind of long-winded way of explaining it is, yes, when I did buy in Newcastle and then also a little bit later in Brisbane, of course, I wanted the properties to go up over the next couple of years, but exactly when, I didn't know. So in that aspect, a little bit of it is also luck.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So kind of going on from that, so Newcastle, the two there, and also Nambucca Heads, what ended up happening around 2015 also was Sydney started to increase. So the one unit that I bought in Macquarie Park did quite well.
Okay.
And I remember specifically where in 1 year I poured out 70, 80,000. And in the following year, I poured out another 70, 80,000. And
so you're stoked at this point.
Just over the moon. I'm like, these are just providing more capital to then put into more properties, and they're kind of just feeding itself in that sense. The caveat to that is back then, it was pre-APRA days. It was a lot easier to get lending.
Yep.
Yeah. So all up, I think the numbers were quite insane in the sense that my salary was around 80,000 and the 14 properties, the loan around it was around 3 million.
3 million on 80K.
Yeah.
If someone came to you now and said, I want to do the same thing,
it'll be a lot harder, yes.
Still possible? Just a lot harder?
Not to that scale.
No?
No.
Okay.
So, I mean, I do have clients say around that income, well, they're probably sitting on about 6 properties. So you're probably not looking at 3 million. You're looking at loan-wise, maybe anywhere between 1 to 1.5, depending on the rent.
Okay.
And you know, we can go into the strategies behind that and so on and so forth. But essentially what happened during that period was the properties that I had earlier, the first 5 properties, I was extracting equity from them. And I was very limited in terms of borrowing capacity. So that also paved the way or pushed me in a direction to buy properties with high rental return.
Okay.
I couldn't buy something, say, at that point in time for 400,000 and the rent was only 350, 300.
And this is another reason why Logan was attractive?
Exactly. So in Logan, early on, you could buy properties in the 2s, in the late 2s, and they'll rent for like $400 a week.
Yeah, they're pretty good returns.
So you were getting 6-7% off the bat without any work. And they would help me in terms of prolonging my servicing for a little bit longer. And what ended up happening is I got to know the agents a little bit more in the area. So every fortnight from Sydney, I would fly to Brisbane.
Every fortnight?
Every fortnight.
Are you feeling a bit like a baller at this stage?
No. You don't feel like a baller when you wake up at 4 o'clock to catch the 6 o'clock flight to Brisbane.
Yeah, okay.
And then 3 o'clock and then there was a number of times you'll fly up and just not buy a property. Like it's common. You know, you would just spend airfares going through. The best thing, you know, those times did was I did a lot of networking with the real estate agents.
I think a lot of the power that I understand in that as well, and I'd assume you'd echo this, is that when you do put in that effort and go to that level of investment time-wise, you're not just text on an email or voice over a phone. It's like, oh no, this is Michael. He's that real person that I know that if I've got a deal, like I can call him. And I'd imagine maybe some more deals started coming your way because of that.
100%. Like they know that the fact that you're spending airfares going up there fortnightly, that you're a pretty serious buyer. And then just naturally back then, it's like you'll go to an open home and you'll literally be the only person at the open home. And you'll just have a yarn with an agent for like half an hour. And then after the open home, I'll just go to Macca's with them and then just have lunch. And we ended up building some really good relationship with the agents there. Even to our wedding, a bunch of the local agents came to our wedding. Really? Yeah. So that kind of feeds itself. And so, you know, after you build that relationship, there's actually a number of times where they'll be at an auction and the bidders aren't bidding. And then he'll just give me a phone call and literally over the phone, I'll buy a property. And that's happened multiple times.
That's insane.
And they also know that.
Just quickly jump in. Is that one that you've seen before? Or
no.
So you've just got
I literally just bring it up on my phone and I'll flick through the pictures. And I'll just buy it on the spot. Like if what
level are you at then? Because that's I just almost feel like I put a little caveat there for anyone that's like at rental number 1 or 2. There's a lot of risk attached to what you're doing there.
100%. And keep in mind, I didn't do this for the first bunch of properties. That's why I was flying up there, going through each of the open homes, doing a building a pest on each purchase.
Yeah.
I'm talking about later down the path. And the caveat to that is you're literally buying the properties so cheap that even if there were issues, you're somewhat covered for that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Like, I'll give you examples. Like we bought a 3-bedroom house. It's going on about in 2021, 2022, a 3-bedroom house. And
21, 22, I thought things were like booming.
correct, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
In Logan Central,
Yeah.
and we paid $245 for it.
How?
It was just no one was bidding at auction. It was a divorcee.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was like in those instances, you're literally signing a piece of paper and you're making 100K on the way in. Now, because of that, I also then ended up putting more eggs into Logan because I had those connections.
Yep.
I was doing loans during that time for clients, and the majority of the loans I was doing, actually, funnily enough, was in Moreton Bay Council.
Okay.
And if you looked at purely just from a future growth potential, I actually believed in Moreton Bay a little bit more. But I didn't have the connections on the ground there to then get those better deals.
Okay.
So that's why I also kind of gravitated towards one council a little bit more.
So you're a big believer in like having your BDA, your farm area, your place where you go, like, this is where I focus?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in it's better to specialize as opposed to diversify. Like, I'll give you kind of some examples around that. Work with some clients, and the clients that have done well, whether it's in business or property investing, is they do one thing and they do it really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a client that does development in Brisbane, and he only does it in Brisbane City Council, and he only does it in a few certain suburbs. And he knows the codes there so well that other people may look at a block and can't find a solution to it because of constraints. But because he knows the code so well, he knows that he can get it through in terms of council.
Okay.
But he can only get to that level because he's an absolute expert in that area. I've got other people running businesses. Some of the businesses that do well is they're quite niche. And because of that, then they can get a good market share.
I actually watched a story the other day on, was it Yahoo?
Yep.
There's this YouTube channel called Media Magnates.
Mm.
You might actually find it interesting.
Yep.
And it's basically all stories of like the biggest businesses, and the kid tells it with enthusiasm. It's really good. And I was curious as to why Yahoo failed, because to me, it was almost like the MySpace, Facebook argument. It's like MySpace should have won. Facebook shouldn't have.
Yep.
And that's a whole different one. But apparently the answer to the question was Yahoo didn't know what it was. It was all these different things.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, slowly but surely, I should say, all of these other competitors that just did one of the things all started coming out of the woodwork and specialized and just overtook. And Yahoo ended up just basically fizzling into nothingness. And it's still around today, but it should be bigger than Google.
100%.
But they didn't specialize.
Yep, exactly. And a big fan of Warren Buffett. Mm-hmm. And in his book, he just rubbishes diversification. He's like, why should I diversify? I've got these 4 or 5 companies that make up 99% of his portfolio, but he knows that these companies perform really, really well. And he goes, if I want average returns, then I'll just buy the index.
What's one of his quotes? Diversification is an insurance policy against ignorance.
Yeah, exactly. So at the time when I was putting money in Logan, one, I believed in it. And for me, I had those connections on the ground. Whereas if I went to a different area, like say, for instance, even Moreton Bay Council, I didn't have that. So I just really believed in, okay, I know an area really, really well. Mm-hmm. I just put a lot of the eggs in that. And there's other kind of economies of scale that kind of branch out from that. So now we self-manage all of the properties.
All of them?
In Brisbane.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you almost have your own agency.
We do have our own agency.
Okay.
Yeah. So my wife runs, we have our own property management company, and we just manage our own properties.
Right. Okay. I don't think of that as self-managing, but I guess it is.
Yeah. But because they're all in the same council, it's a lot easier to get trades. We've got, good access.
Yep.
As opposed to if we had one property here, one property in Ipswich, one property in Caboolture, it'll be a lot harder to manage from that perspective.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you feel then, as far as the diversification piece from like more of a land tax perspective is concerned? You must get stung with that a bit? Or?
Yeah. There are strategies around it, particularly in terms of Queensland. You've got trusts and so on and so forth. But I see land tax as kind of like a cost of doing business.
Okay.
And in terms of diversification, at certain points, you're going to be forced to diversify. Like if you ask me now, would I want to put more money in Logan? Well, if I could get it at sub 300 with 7% rental return, I'll keep putting eggs into that basket. But now you can't.
Yeah,
now,
they don't exist now.
correct. Now the yields are 4.5%.
Yeah.
Property is at 600,000-700,000. So there kind of came a point in time, was about 3 years ago, where we wanted to buy more in Logan, but bar the kind of one exceptional deal or just, a very unusual circumstance, it just wasn't possible.
Mm-hmm.
So from a numbers perspective, you were forced to diversify. So that's kind of the reason why then we moved into Perth. And similar reasons for me moving away from Newcastle up to Brisbane. I would have loved to invest more in Newcastle because when the tide started to expand out from Sydney, Newcastle's, a lot of people's perception on it completely changed. And the numbers in terms of the growth went up very, very quickly. But when I came to the opportunity where I had the equity ready to go again, those numbers weren't achievable in Newcastle anymore. So then I had to be pushed out into other areas. So I think eventually you're going to be forced to diversify because of the numbers. But what I'm saying is I don't buy, say, one property in Logan and the next one I actively look in another area just so I can have a few different.
You cluster.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Until the point where the numbers don't make sense and then you're forced to move.
Can you talk to me a little bit more about the income piece? Because
Yes.
you don't get to $20 million worth of debt by earning like even a good like wage. You must be pulling in a fair decent amount, or this is a business, or how the hell does this work, Michael?
Sure.
Like it's huge.
And I had the same question. And the person that helped me through a lot of this is actually the broker that I used when I first started my journey. And I remember asking Rolf Latham was my broker then.
Okay.
And I asked him, how are these people like, your Nathan Birches and other people on 30, 40, 50 plus properties? How is that even possible? And at the end of the day, a lot of it, as unfortunate as it is, it's a function of income.
Okay. So unless you boost up that income, it's not happening.
Correct. And like I could get to a fairly decent sized property portfolio using my corporate income. But I knew at 2015 that if I wanted to grow it substantially, maybe I could add one property, every couple of years. This was before APRA kicked in. When they kicked in, that wouldn't have been possible either. But if I wanted to then expand beyond that, a lot of it will have to come from a high income source. So that was part of the reason for starting the broking business in 2015. And from 2015 to 2017, there was actually quite a big gap in terms of acquiring properties because for that 2 years, I was just focused on building the business income.
Plus, you're a bit invisible to the banks in those early days, yeah?
Well, you can't use your tax return until your ABN's been around for 18 to 24 months. And I remember back then sitting on the sidelines for 2 years was excruciating.
You have itchy feet.
Yeah, correct. You'll see like a lot of my clients picking up these deals. Yeah. And also at that time, it kind of taught me that there is always a deal out there. Yeah, and that, one kind of, well, I wouldn't say mistake, but one lesson that I took from early on that I was too impatient. Some of the properties that I bought early on, they weren't very good.
Okay.
And it was just because I wanted to buy yesterday. I thought that if I didn't get into the market, all of these deals would get away and then increase in value, but that actually wasn't the case. So I rushed a lot of my earlier purchases, where later in terms of the properties that I've acquired more recently, because of that experience, then I'm a lot more patient.
So that time in reflection really like benefited you in other ways of really, I guess, going, what am I doing good? What am I not doing so good?
Exactly. And, so sometimes I know when I speak to investors, there'll be a period of time, whether in terms of savings or whether in terms of income, they can't actively grow their property portfolio. And that was exactly the case for me during those 2 years. But I also wouldn't look at it in terms of you're actually not moving your property journey ahead, because you're working on things to then allow you, when you do come back to purchasing or pulling out equity, that will then leapfrog you to then grow the property portfolio faster. So I think it's easier to think that if you're not buying properties, you're not getting ahead. But in some instances, it's like, it's a game of seasons. There's like, winter, summer, spring, autumn. There's times that you sow, other times you bunker down. Maybe you just wait out the lack of servicing, or during that time you work on your own servicing. And then when you can work on that and you come back to it, that's when then you can go and expand on from there.
So in terms of if someone's wanting to really build something huge, the way that you have, what I'm hearing is unless you're building a business, it's not happening. or like the CEO of something pretty big.
You can play around with the edges. Like I do know that, you can buy properties in trusts to hide, some of the debt based on certain lenders. I mean, that's possible in theory. In practice, I think is a little bit harder because you have to get an accountant to write that the trust is self-sufficient. But if you're looking at it on a larger scale, yes, it would just be income-based, whether it's through a business or whether it's through a high-paying job. Now, you can grow a decent-sized property portfolio and, for a lot of people in terms of the goals, like that's already amazing. But then, like to answer your question, if you then want to go beyond 10, 20, 30, 40, a lot of that will then be based on a function of income.
Yeah, because let's face it, like a quarter of what you've got is already amazing. So like most people would be very content with that, which is actually going to be a question that I want to ask in a second. But something that I wanted to touch on with you, Michael, is I really believe that the three pillars with success, and I think this isn't just success in property investing. I think this is just success full stop. But to me, it's mindset, knowledge, and action. Now, I don't think you're going to be achieving anything with just one of them. I think you might achieve a little bit of something with two of them, but really you need all three to actually make this come together.
Yep.
Now, I'm curious, as someone that's achieved a huge portfolio, as an investor, what would you want to see people? Actually, let me ask this slightly differently. What should people be doing on those three pillars of mindset, knowledge, and action if they really want to replicate what you've done?
I'll tackle each of them individually. So in terms of mindset, that was actually the biggest shift in terms of just my thinking when I got into property investing. And the start of it was actually the broker that helped me throughout that journey. And he actually then ended up mentoring me to become a broker. So he was my inspiration for becoming a mortgage broker.
Okay.
And I remember the very first call that I had with him, and he asked me, what's my goal? And I know a lot of property investors on forums get asked that question. And early on, not a lot of people know how to answer that. And I was the same. I didn't know in terms of what the property investment side of things would then eventually lead to. And I'll be honest, it wasn't until probably about 5-6 properties deep that I then make that connection in terms of goals. But in terms of just generally on self-development, I didn't set myself any goals. I didn't look into reading, books like, Think and Grow Rich,
yep.
Those types of books.
So you weren't a Tony Robbins fan or anything like that?
No. Okay. So that was completely foreign. And I went down a whole path of kind of exploring that side of things. And that changed my mindset completely.
And was that at a certain stage for you as far as your growth? Like it changed your mindset and then you saw things happen differently or?
Correct, yeah. So that was around 2013. So that was, when I, seeing the videos from Nathan Birch, that kind of opened up my eyes in terms of what's possible.
Okay.
But that's just really, Nathan could do it, but that doesn't mean that I could do it. For me to then believe in that more was then through a series of self-development, speaking to Rolf, reading these books, having a few runs on the board through the renovations, and then that kind of then slowly building on from there. So one question that I get asked is, Michael, do you have any books that you would recommend? Mm-hmm. And the books that helped me the most in my journey are the ones that were more so self-development as opposed to property related.
Which ones?
There's a book called Slight Edge by Jeff Olson.
I've never even heard of it. Slight Edge. Okay.
Yeah. So in a very quick nutshell, he talks about, and he went and studied a whole bunch of people that were very successful. And then he looked at people that weren't, as successful. And what he came down was that the successful people didn't do anything that drastically different, but every day they did something little by little to then move the needle.
Yeah.
So say for instance, like OMU's going to the gym, for example, it's not like you're going to go to the gym for a week and suddenly you're going to see results. Mm-hmm. But then if you speak to someone that never misses a day, goes to the gym for half an hour and he does it for 5-6 years, then that person gets the results. Now, is it hard to commit 30 minutes in a day? Probably not. So it's easy to do. Mm-hmm. And it's easy not to do. So that's why the book is called Slight Edge, because every day you're getting a very slight edge in terms of moving you to your goal.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, Slight Edge.
It's a wonderful book. And I had the audio of it, and I remember just playing it in the car repeatedly. I probably listened to it about 50, 60 times.
Wow, that really made an impact.
Yeah, and it was just...
Or was that just the only book you owned?
But it was just drumming in, because sometimes it's like you do something in property investing and nothing happens. You don't move the needle.
Mm-hmm.
You spend a lot of time researching, or you offer on a property and you miss out. And it's very disheartening. But what that book reinforces, that idea, is you might not get the results, but if you do a little bit every single day, then over the long term, then you will then see results.
I love that. That's a brilliant answer for the mindset side. But actually, before we move on to knowledge, is there anything else that you wanted to say on the mindset?
I guess kind of coming in from that, a lot of those books made a much bigger impact than in terms of a property specific book.
Yep.
A good property specific book, I would say, is Jane Summers.
Mm-hmm.
So she's the one that founded Summersoft.
Mm-hmm.
I think the book called More Wealth from Property Investing.
Another one.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that book kind of drums in a nutshell in terms of buy and hold, holding it for a cycle and the effect of it. Purely from a numbers explanation basis, I think that's brilliant. But once you understand property investing, it's not rocket science. It's not like something that's been invented just recently. It's been around for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether someone succeeds or not, it's not, yes, it is a certain amount of knowledge, but the key to it is in terms of mindset. Because the other thing that I noticed too is with working a lot of investors, at one point in your journey, you're going to get tested.
What do you mean?
Like in terms of your belief in property investing, whether it's the path to go down or not, because it's not going to be always easy. Mm-hmm. You're not always going to be buying a property, the tenant pays the rent on time every single month, and then 12 months later, you're pulling out 100,000 in equity. Reality is not that easy. So there will be times during your journey that you're like, oh man, I don't know if this is the right thing. I don't know if this is working. And then your mindset and your belief in that will get tested. So that's why a lot of these books like Slight Edge, Think and Grow Rich, a lot of these things that help with the mindset will then help you get past that. And having a goal in mind is super important. So the period of my investment career that I feel was the most exciting and I also grew the most was in my first 2 years. So from 2013 to 2015. And the reason for that was I had a really clear goal, and the goal was to quit work. I didn't enjoy corporate. I was, in the corporate role. And towards the end, I've been in there for close to 10 years at that point in time. I was just jaded with corporate. And I was just certain that I wanted to tick it out. And when after the first couple of renovations, I saw that that could potentially be the ticket that I needed, it was a burning desire to achieve that goal to then allow me then to quit work. And I'll tell you, after then, I haven't had a goal that's as strong in terms of every moment you're just waking and breathing it.
People tell me kids changes it a lot. I've heard it on both sides though. Some people say kids changes it in the way where you go, oh, I don't care about it anymore. Like my children and my life, I just want to spend time with them. But then I hear the flip side of people going, this little switch just flicked and I went even harder because I just wanted to give them everything. Did you have that same, or either one of those with kids or not?
Not to the same extent. I mean, it could be in terms of life stage or just kind of me personally. But I would say that, yes, definitely kids added motivation because there's extra mouth to feed in the family. But it wasn't like the sole reason of me trying to grow this machine because of the kids.
Okay.
I would say that, we can touch on it later in terms of kind of, motivations around now. But I'll say in terms of my investment journey, it wasn't as clear as what it was back then.
Yeah.
So kind of to wrap that up in terms of the first point on mindset is having a very clear and strong goal is one of the most important things. And then also after that is kind of working on your mindset and also self-development.
Love it. So you need that North Star to really run towards.
100%. Because if you don't and you get challenged or something doesn't go your way, I've seen plenty of people just kind of cut the cord at that point in time.
So easy to stray from it.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. As far as the knowledge piece is concerned,
yep.
What do you think is probably the most important skill people should sharpen on that side?
Knowledge kind of works a little bit in two paths. It's like, one, you've got the theoretical knowledge. So you would read the forums, you would listen to podcasts, you would speak to other investors. So that's everything in theory. But then also on top of that, you need to have the practical side of things. You need to then execute on what you've learned. And if you can do a feedback loop between both, then over time, you will then become a better investor. So I'll give you an example of this.
I already like where this is going.
Yeah.
Yep.
So basically, let's say I know there's courses out there in terms of, property investing. Let's say you do a course. If you don't action any of it, that's not going to help you. But if you take those learnings, or say, for instance, you listen to a podcast and then, there's some key points that you can execute, you take those learnings and then you practice it. You do that when you're offering on a property or when you're evaluating a deal. And then you see how, in terms of the agent responds or how the actual market responds to that. And then you're like, oh, great. And then something will happen that kind of throws you off, just because, your perception to reality will be a little bit different, especially when you go into a new area for investing. So, and you take that learning, then you go back and then you grow a little bit more knowledge, kind of just maybe you get bogged down in terms of negotiating with an agent. Well, then, and I did, when I was kind of learning property investing, then when I went back to the knowledge, I'm then reading negotiation books. How can I improve myself in that area? Then I'll take those learnings and then practice it on an actual deal. And then if you can feed back between the practical and also the knowledge, then over time you can then improve. You can't just do the practical speaking to agents and, but not really kind of learning the mechanics of property investing either. So that's why you need both.
So it's all well and good to read the books, to learn, to listen to the podcasts, but unless you're continuously refining what you've learned
and taking action,
you're never going to level up.
Yep, 100%. But if you just continually going out there, putting things in action, but you're not improving from a technical basis, then you're not growing that much either, because you're not taking on new skills.
So when I was younger, I was very much the parrot investor. This is the only reason, I shouldn't know Summersoft, I shouldn't know any of this stuff, because I really started investing only 6 years ago. It was 2017-ish. And maybe that's 7 years, I don't know. Maths isn't my strong point. But I used to read everything. I would tell everyone all the wonderful things about property investing. And I had one basically off the plan apartment. And I did actually buy a place in Horsham that I later had to give away in a settlement. But really, I didn't do anything. The action piece for me was the biggest thing that held me back, because I was super enthusiastic. I'd read all of the Rich Dad Poor Dad, the mindset, everything like that. And I had the knowledge, but I'm now learning, since we started the Unstuck Yourself series, there is heaps of people out there that are in the exact same boat. So on the action piece, what's probably your biggest words of wisdom to get people, I guess, comfortable with going no, let's do this?
I think in terms of the mindset also kind of ties into it. So say, for instance, you don't need to change the world. So I'll give you a specific example. Let's say, for instance, you're looking to buy your first investment property, and there are so many steps that you need to do before actually buying that property. And a lot of people rate their success or their failure on that end goal in terms of buying that property. But what they should be looking at is all the little steps or the journey beforehand to get to that. I'll give you an example of this. I think I watched it was an Olympian, and they were interviewing her after she had won gold. And they said, over the last 4 years, were you envisioning yourself standing on the podium with the gold medal around your neck? And she was like, that's the last thing I was thinking of. From a daily basis, what I was thinking is, as I come out of the starting block, the position of my leg. As I go around the bend, how my arms were. So it's that thing where you focus on the process and the result will take care of itself. So going back to the investor, if you say, for instance, just spoke to 2 agents every single day, and you had that as your first benchmark, then at least you're moving the needle a little bit. Then after that, you can probably then pick it up a bunch.
Giving you a slight edge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then putting in offers.
Okay.
And then after the offers, then maybe it's something else. And then don't get bummed if, say, for instance, you don't end up buying that property, and a person's mind could be deemed as a failure. But because you focused on that process, that should actually be a success because you're moving gradually closer towards that end goal. And like I have this chat quite a bit. I've yet to meet someone who every single day put in a little bit of an effort, and if they did it for long enough, everyone eventually achieved that goal of them buying the property. But on the flip side, if someone got really, really motivated for the first week, they just smashed it, After work, they looked at properties. On the weekend, they were, going through all of these forums, talking to investors. But then, on an offer, it didn't go their way. And they didn't really look at it back over the next 3 or 4 weeks. They picked it up for another day or so, and then they kind of went another way. Then in that instance, potentially you won't get that result.
I don't remember who this quote was from, but I think I heard it from Alexander Phillips, a very well-known real estate agent. And what was it? Don't be upset with the results you didn't get from the work you didn't do. And I love that. Whenever I start feeling sorry for myself, that's a great one to just like give yourself a friendly little kick in the bum with, to be like, wait a second, have I really earned this thing that I want? Am I actually putting in the effort for it?
Yep.
9 times out of 10, the answer is no.
Yep.
And it gets you back on track as long as you take it the right way.
Correct. And it doesn't have to be like a huge thing. Like you don't need to move the needle in a giant way, but it's just little bit here, little bit there. And over time, you'll look back on it and you're like, actually, I've come a fair way. But as you're going through that process, it never feels like that. There's another saying, what's it? You overestimate what can be achieved in the short term, but underestimate what can be achieved in the long term. And it's exactly that. And going back to that book again, Slight Edge is kind of in that same regard, where you're just kind of focusing little bit. And then eventually by focusing on the process, the result will take care of itself.
I feel like we should put an affiliate link in the show notes, mate.
So hopefully that answers in terms of investors wanting to take action doesn't even need to be big, just a little bit every single day.
So mindset, get your goal in order. You have to have that North Star, as I'll put it. Knowledge, make sure that you've got a feedback loop. You're learning, but then you're putting it into practice. And as far as actually getting things into practice, what's that sort of one takeaway from it that you're really saying there? Just start small?
Start small, slight edge, and then, you don't need to solve the entire problem in one day, but if you just take little nibbles at it and then focusing on the process, eventually then you'll get there.
Getting towards the end of things here, I want to ask why. Because building a portfolio of 5, 10, 15, as we've already said, that would already be pretty awesome. Why push so hard to 60 odd? And I haven't even asked you where the goal is to stop yet. I'm assuming you're probably not even there.
Yep.
Why?
That's a good question. That's something that I ask myself. I do put in goals in place, but if you ask me, is it like a burning goal that I had earlier to quit work? They're probably not as much. So one goal that I have at the moment now is eventually, and I haven't purchased my principal place, is to buy a really, really nice principal place. Okay. And every couple of years that passes by, that principal place seems to get a little bit more expensive.
Okay.
So at the moment, if you ask me, that's probably, one of the driving factors. On the flip side, it's almost like a challenge to yourself where if you learn these new skills and you become better as an investor, where can you then push it? And kind of the other thing that I think about too is like I've had clients go and also friends go down this path where they've retired in a sense and they're cashed in terms of what they've achieved. And
they're not happy?
Yeah. I mean, the question is, do they really feel alive?
Okay.
Yeah. So I think that you can only sit on the beach drinking margaritas for a certain amount of time before you get bored.
Yeah.
And that's what is in the back of my mind is if I stop investing, if I stop broking, I think I would love it for the next 1 to 2 months where I've just got no one hassling me. I've got no, kind of issues with the property investing side of things that I need to deal with. But I think after that, I'll get bored. And in terms of just as a personality, I'll need something to challenge and to feel alive by.
So it really gives you purpose.
Correct. And like, I think the key thing, what it is in life, it's almost like when you're pushing that edge to a certain point where you're a little bit uncomfortable and you're on the edge, that's also when things are exciting. When you're in your comfort zone for a period of time and you're going through the same motion time and time again, then it can get quite boring. And I've experienced that, during my life, where for a period of time in terms of my corporate life, because of a change in management, for a period of about 2 years, I essentially didn't have a manager. And I could show up to work at 12 o'clock and leave at 3, 4 o'clock and no one would know. And that was great for a period of time, but eventually I just got so bored out of my brain and I was then looking for something to stimulate my mind. So I think to answer your question, it is partly to have a purpose in life. It's to push the boundaries and also to be a little bit more on the edge so you also feel alive.
I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting this very clear, concise, the goal is this, there's an X figure, something worked out.
Yeah, no, I mean, early on it was. But I think also, interestingly enough, the thing that I've also gathered over time as kind of going down this path too, is one of the things that I look back on is if I look back on all my earlier goals, and I write a lot of my goals in a book. And actually between me and my wife, that's one exercise that we do. Generally around every 6 to 12 months, we go away and write all of the goals that we have in a notebook. We'll just sit down at a cafe and then write our goals.
Can I ask?
Yes.
How do you reflect on that? Because my wife and I did that once.
Yes.
Actually, no, twice, sorry.
Yep.
Worked really well, like it was pumped us up and everything. But then we never put it in the diary to keep holding each other accountable.
Sure.
And to actually and then I ended up looking at the end of last year. Last year was a prickly year for both of us.
Yep.
But it was almost a little bit deflating looking at what we'd set ourselves to do.
Sure.
And then not kind of holding that accountability. Do you and your wife also have like a weekly check-in or a monthly check-in, or do you just kind of revisit at the end of the year and that's it?
Yeah, no, we just revisit it at the end of the year. And to be frank, sometimes the things that we put in, we forget about it. And a lot of the things isn't in terms of purely financial or something to achieve. Like we've got different sections of the kids, relationships, business goals, financial goals, kind of travel, like a whole breadth of things. So it's not just purely in terms of one area that's specific. Sometimes we look at it, and probably for the last couple of years, health, we look at it every year. I'm like, no, that's gone like zero. It's probably gone backwards.
Okay.
But on other things, it's like, oh, actually it's done, quite well. And it was just interesting more so just to see the mindset or our thinking was at that time, 6 to 12 months ago. That was actually probably what was more interesting about the exercise. And the other thing that we also noticed was the more goals that we had written down there, a good portion of that actually came true. And it wasn't partly because we, continually focused on it every day, but, what's that book? There's a book that Oprah Winfrey kind of...
You mean like the Secret or that
kind
of
thing?
thing?
The Secret. It was like kind of when you write it down, it like puts the higher powers and, it's a little bit like that where...
Laws of attraction.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So when you write it down, there is a little bit of a power in that. So just as an exercise every 6 to 12 months, but kind of the key thinking is actually to look back at that period and what our thinking was. One of the things that kind of limited me early on was a lot of my goals was quite small.
Okay.
So now moving forward, it's like you put more outlandish goals, and a lot of time I don't achieve them. Most of the time I actually don't achieve them. And
you're fine with yourself in that? Because like if I do that, sometimes I'll beat myself up.
Okay.
And it's like, oh, you didn't do that. Oh, what about that? And so, well, you did do that one. That's okay. But then I'll focus on the things that I didn't do.
Okay.
Do you ever, doesn't sound like you do.
No, I mean, say for instance, if I've got, say, a property goal, whatever it is, say hypothetically, if I didn't quite get there, but at least I moved the needle somewhat, I might have moved a little bit more than if I set a really comfortable goal, then I'm okay with setting a higher goal in that regard.
So as far as motivation coming from the carrot or the stick, it sounds like you're more carrot than
correct.
stick.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think I'm changing. I think I'm probably more stick, and I don't like that about myself because I'd rather it come from a place of positivity. But yeah, that's interesting to know. All right, wrapping things up then, Michael. An action step. If you've, not if, I know you've inspired everyone that's listening right now. If someone's listening and they're thinking, geez, this guy's got it together, what's something that they can do that is a complete action step? Pull out the headphones right now, they can put into practice.
Well, I'll give the action step that I took that when I first got addicted to property investing. So aside from listening to podcasts, doing a lot of research, reading forums, apart from that piece, I would say the key thing in terms of if you're going to be going down this path seriously, treat it as a business and then form a good team.
Okay.
So for a period of around 6 months, I spent, before I then actually jumped in and made a property purchase, so around the 2013 mark, I spent a lot of time interviewing a bunch of brokers, a bunch of accountants, spoke to some buyers agents. So really forming a really good team. And I feel by taking the time in doing that, as opposed to diving in to make a purchase, that then set me up a lot better to grow faster once I had formed the team. So it's like setting up a business. You know, you would hire for your marketing person, you would hire for your CFO. Treat it like that. Just each person has a critical part to play in your investment journey. And what I've noticed with teams is you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Okay.
So you might, say for instance, just, as an example, you might have everyone nutted out perfectly in your team, but the person that you've got to project manage your renovation is a little bit weaker. Then that project isn't going to go so well. And, like that's happened so many times. The number of times that I've changed property managers, say for instance, I mean, I've gone through a whole bunch of different property managers over the years. If you find that that person isn't up to scratch, then what's, the saying from Donald Trump? It's like hire slow but fire fast. So, if
sounds like something. Yeah,
correct. Yeah. So if they're not cutting it and they're not helping you get to where you want to go, then I would, look for other alternatives. But I did spend a lot of time basically going to each professional and then basically saying, hey, this is what I want to achieve. This is where I am. Can you help me achieve that? And there'll be some that just weren't completely aligned. They kind of looked at what I wanted to do and they're like, that's not possible. But then you'll speak to some other people and they'll be like, oh, actually, this is what you do.
I just want to echo exactly what Michael's saying here, because this is so powerful. The not possible piece, it's like, no, it's not that it's not possible. It's what they're saying is, I don't know how to do that. And I don't want to say, I don't know how to do that. So I'm just going to tell you it's not possible. So do not get like disenchanted if you hear someone say it's not possible. I think that's so important.
100%.
And speaking of important things, and it's almost dinner anyway, you and I could go grab one. I need to ask you, Michael Shah, what is your favorite pizza?
My favorite pizza will actually be margarita.
Margarita?
Yeah,
Okay.
plain and simple.
Nice and simple. I like it.
Yeah.
That's one of my faves as well, mate.
Yeah.
Well, mate, look, is there anywhere special you're getting that from? Or you and your wife got like a pizza oven at home? Or
there's a good place in Macquarie Park in Sydney that does a pretty good pizza.
Want to give it a shout out?
I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but Google Macquarie Park Pizza and they won awards and they're very, very good. So, yeah.
Okay. So the most awarded one in Macquarie Park.
That's it. Yeah.
Easy. Mate, you have got a hell of a story. I know that you're not at the end of it. I'm sure we'll probably sit down again in a couple of years' time talking about the guy with 100 rentals plus. But if anyone wants to get in touch with you as well, we'll leave some details for you in the show notes below. So if you want to have a chat with Michael, and talk broking, all the rest of it, mate, you're an absolute wealth of knowledge. And thank you so much for your time today on the show.
No, thank you, Todd. Been awesome being on the show. Thank you.